Thank you very much. Well, the title of my presentation, The Aztec Cosmovisión of Death Before the Conquest, might seem a little bit ambitious, of course, because in terms of bioethics, an appropriate approach to death in pre-Hispanic times would require the whole Congress, I think. And among the Aztecs, the man was considered a creature of death in the sense the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, gave to that expression. And we had different aspects. For example, the first one, the different parts of the netherworld, or the other world that people were going to when they died. In this case, for example, we have here the house of the sun, the house of Tlaloc, and the Mictlan. One is still to be showed. That's Sincalco. You had also the funeral rites, and after the funeral rites, the Days of the Dead, very many topics. Human sacrifice, for example. Carlos showed some pictures from the Florentine Codex, which are a little bit, Spanish-like, the pictures. And here is the real concept of what would be a sacrifice, a human sacrifice to Mother Earth and Mother Death in this case. The house of the sun, people who were sacrificed to the sun were going to the house of the sun, Tonatiuhichan. You have a beautiful picture of Codex Laude of what would have been the vision of a human sacrifice by Aztecs. And here you have the umbilical vision of death among the Aztecs. You can see Mictlantecuhtli, the god of death, which is cutting some kind of a umbilical cord of what would be death. The ball game was also a temple on which the were sacrificed and they were beheaded, as you can see. And you can see that the ball, the black ball, and the skull, which means that the player had the luck to pass the ball through the circle, and that would provide water. And then the fourth place, I showed in the second pictures, the three places, where they were going after death. There is another one which is not mentioned by Sahagún, certainly because he wanted to have, three places, just like in the Christian vision of death. But there is another one, Sincalco. In this case, for example, it's interesting in terms of bioethics to see that when the Spaniards came, Cortes was absolutely amazed. He was scared, and he wanted to disappear. He would ask his high priestess, "Where can I go?" And they say, well, there are four places you can go. You can go to Mictlan, the netherworld. You can go to Tlalocan, the place of the rain. You can go to Tonatiuhichan, the place of the sun. Or you can go to Sincalco, the place of the house of maize. And he chose to go to Sincalco. He couldn't go because, something different happened. This is a picture that Carlos showed also, but I would, in terms of what I'm going to treat, which is the generative and regenerative value of death, there is something which is very interesting. When a child died before, he would eat maize when he was still, suckling his mother's breast, he wouldn't go, to Mictlan, and he was considered as just a little shoot of maize, and he would go right away back to earth. There was not a ceremonial rites of bringing him back to death, to the earth. It's very interesting. Before the 3 years old, a baby who died was going to this place, Chichihualcuauhco, the place of the tree of breasts, the booby trees, we could say, maybe. And he was suckling the sap of this tree. It's very interesting because before, a baby was 3 years old, before he had eaten maize, he had no body yet. He was still belonging to earth, to his mother earth, because he was drinking, excuse me, the sap of his mother. and there was no funeral rite. And I think before I continue with with my topic, I would like to show you some consideration of heuristic and epistemological matters, and what we have, how can I talk about the vision the Aztecs had of death before the conquest, and you have this orality pictorial books, and the Spaniards, in the 16th century, when they wanted to evangelize better the natives, the indigenous, they had to know better the way they thought, So we had the luck, to have all this recopilation of that, of information. But the problem is that, orality and pictorial books were not always well understood by Spaniards, and they were also exploited because they wanted to use, Aztec thought to be able to convince them that Christian religions were the best, And this is more or less what we have. And we have many Spanish interpolations. If you see sometimes the sources in Spanish, or especially, you will see that the Spanish are interpolated. I'm going to read it now so you can hear how it sounds. They say, only once here on earth. I do believe this is not a proper thought of the old Aztec people, because the Spaniards, they wanted to change the idea they had, and of course death was the main stuff, and they wanted to convince them that there was only one stay on earth. There was no possibility to come back again. But if we have the authentic indigenous text, they were saying, Kayu mihtoaya inihquat timiki, kamonelli timiki, kayeti yoli, kayeti toskalia, kayeti nemi, kayeti isa. That they said, when we die, we don't really die. We still live, we still grow, we still exist, we wake up. Another source is, in Yewanti Nashkan Nemi, Oxepan Nemiske, Yeske. Those who will now live again, those who live now will live again, will be again. So I think this is very important, when we're reading sources, even if there are now sometimes, we don't have the right information because the Spaniards, they wanted to change the idea the natives had of death. And you can see here, you have the first one, which is an interpolation of Nahuatl text, in Nahuatl in this case, and the other one, which, according to me, are the real thought they have about death, that death, you're coming several times on earth, and there is a return, on earth several times. Now, I think everything is starting with the expansion of the world. I think before we talk about death, we talk about the generative and regenerative matters, I think it's important to recall the different eras. First, we saw them with Carlos' pictures also, First, the world of earth, then a world of air, of wind, and another one after of fire, and then of a flood. And I think here in this case, the most important thing is in the very center. Here you have both the God of the fire and the God of sun, which would be superposed in this case. You have the different eras here. You have the sacrifices here. You have the heart in this case, and here you have suddenly Weweteot and Tonatiuh, the sun. This is the picture. This is the concept they had of life, Olin, which is very important. There wouldn't be no life if there was no movement. And this is, you can see here, which is, you have the orientation of the east. You have the four places, the four eras. You have here the circles of the ball game. And in the very middle, you have this eye, the starry eye, we call it, and which is also death. Death is just like an axis of life. We have here the god of death in the very middle of the world also, and you have the four matters. First fire, the rabbit on the right, which is earth, the water and wind. And in the very middle, as you can see here, which is very important, in the very middle of this cross, in this world, you have WCB, the god of fire. And after, of course, there is a myth in which when the fire was created by God, two God jumped into the fire and became two suns. And something which is very important, there were two suns and not one sun and the moon. And of course, with two suns, it was absolutely impossible. The life was not, impossible. They had passed from darkness, from chaos to light, but there was no movement, so it was not possible. So what the gods said, they said, let's die. Mati mikikan, said the gods. And I do believe it's important. I do believe that in this case, life was considered as a part of life. We should not, in this case, we have mikisli, wanyolistli, existence, death, and life. I think this is the main point of my presentation. I think we should not oppose, as we do in the Western world, life and death. In order to understand indigenous death, we have to oppose existence, nemilistli, and death, mikisli, because both of them are life. It's just in metaphorical terms, we could say that we have a systolic, heartbeat, existent, a diastolic heartbeat, death, and both things are life. I think that's a very, very important matter in this case. This would be the way I'm conceiving. First, it might seem very strange to have the north in the underworld. We have to generally the maps in the Aztec worlds were oriented, were to the east. The east should be here, But this is not an Euclidean world. So the horizontality and the verticality are both, are together. And I chose to have the verticality of the world. The sun, in this case, is, appearing in the east, and at noon it's in the south, it's dying in the west, and during death, he's crossing and reappearing again in the east the next morning and the next life, if we're talking in terms of human lives, And you have an evolution, an involution, and you have existence, nemilistli, and death, mikisli. Nemilistli is interesting. It's a word which is composed of nemi or nechnemi, which means to walk, to wander, to go, to advance. And nemilistli is also the way of thinking. Nemilistli means to think. I think it's very interesting to see that nemi plus a particle, a morpheme, which is lia, it's becoming nemilistli, thought. When you're living, when you're existing, better say, when you're existing, you think. And when you're dead, you're being thought. And I think that will be the message of all this. And I think this is the way I consider, you have existence and death, systolic, diastolic heartbeats, and this is life, yolistli. The creation of man, human beings in a Mictlan and other world. On the same way of thinking, I think, distinguishing radically existence and death, and both things being life, I think it's interesting to recall that human being was created within the netherworld. Quetzalcoatl went down to the netherworld, to Mictlan, and over there he asked for the bones that Mictlantecutli, the god of death, was keeping. And he said, I come to pick up the bones. And after that it's a very long myth, of course. It's impossible to evoke everything, every terms in this case. But I think it's important to recall that the penetration of Mictlan by a celestial god that provoked the creation of man. And there is something which is very interesting. Mictlantecutli, in order that Quetzalcoatl could take away the bones to earth, he said, you have to blow into your shell. And he did blow into the shell. And something which is very important, I think, to remind that Mictlantecutli heard it, Owalkak Mictlantecuhtli. In terms of metaphors, I do believe that the sound, the luminous sound in the darkness, because sound is a light in darkness, when you have no light yet, and the luminous sound of the shell, of Quetzalcoatl's shell, penetrated into the ear of Mictlantecuhtli, and I do believe, that's an interpretation of course, but I do believe that in this case, this sound fecundated death. And after in the rites, in the funeral rites, it's going to be a main fact that the shell are going to be blown all the time. And I do believe that it's not only to have music in the context of the funeral rite, but also that because mythologically, I think they did believe, that the sound of the shell would fecundate death. In this order of ideas, it's interesting to remember also that in one of the midwife in the book 6 of Florentine Codex, when the woman was about to give birth, the midwife said, "Ok Yowayan ok Mictlanten idich patitlachtawaashkan." He's still in the darkness. He's still in the night, in the nether world. I mean, in Mictlan, the child we are talking about. And the midwife said that a pregnant woman's womb was Mictlan. That means the realm of death. And I think this is certainly very important to mention all this. Here in this case, you have an illustration. You can see Quetzalcoatl on the right, who is blowing into the shell, and you have what is going to be the volute, the sign of sound and words among the Aztecs. And you have also the prisoner. It's not a Viking who was captured by the Aztecs. That's a human being, and which is related, who is related to the sun. We are saying that through the blonde hair. In front you have here Tezcatlipoca, and this Quetzalcoatl, and this is the sound of his shell. Something which is important to when somebody was dying was being sown. He was being buried, but toca in Nahuatl means to sow and to bury. And you can see here that the human, it's a beautiful picture of the Codex Fersevaimayer, that you can see Tlaltecuhtli in this case, who is eating the body. As I said before, when the child, after 3 years, was starting to eat maize, he had a body made of maize. And when he was dying, Tlaltecuhtli, during 4 years, was eating his body, and in order to have only the bones, the white bones, without flesh, without anything, so that on these bones he would bleed sacrificially his member, his virile member, and he would fecundate death again, And here I think that this is very important, because you start to die in the west of your life, when you're just like a sunset, a setting sun, and you start to die, but you finish to die 4 years after, when the Tlaltecuhtli has eaten your body and has left only your bones. This, you can see the umbilical cord also. You have the Tlaquimiloli, the pack, this is the dead, and you have Tlaltecuhtli, who is eating his body. And this is the soul of a warrior, in this case a colibri, which is suckling a flower, and Mictlantecuhtli in the Codex Lord. Shimishimati, know yourself. Quetzalcoatl becomes conscious of his mortality. It might seem some kind of Hellenic, you have to know yourself. Shimishimati is saying now what in the myth, Quetzalcoatl was a god, but he was also a man. He didn't know he was mortal. And Tezcatlipoca came in front of him, showed him his mirror. He saw himself completely, he was dead, and he had to go to Tlilan Tlapalan. He had to die, to go away, and to be burned, to be incinerated. Here you have a picture of what would be life, when you're a child, when you're an adult, and you're a warrior or a hunter, and then an old man. This is the Codex Vaticano Rios. And after fire, we said at the beginning, that fire was the center of the axis mundi. And when you're dying, and you have, according to the sources, the lords and the kings, they had to be incinerated, and they were being burned. And in fire, you were regenerated. In fire and death, of course, in this case, you were being regenerated. And the text in Nahuatl is saying, you will go to Tlilan Tlapalan, which is a place on the coast of Mexico, but it is also the place that where you are going to be burned. And they were saying, Setlakat Ompratlapia, ye wewetlakat, mononosaske, aninihuatiwal mokwepa, soksepa, tipiltontli mochiwas. There's a man there in Tlilan Tlapalan, an old man. You will talk to him. When you come back, you will be a child again. And there was the regeneration of time and death also. Time had to die. In the Western world, we die because of time. In the pre-Hispanic Aztec world, time had to die also. And here you have, the period of heat, when everything is dried up, and they had to auto-sacrifice to be able to feed again the plants, And they were putting the instruments of bleeding in a bowl of herb. And you can see how they're feeding the sun, in this case, with their blood. Here you have the ceremony of the 52 years of, after 52 years, they did believe that the movement of the world and the movement of the sun turning all the time, the sun was kind of tired, and they had time had to die to be able to continue. And you have here the ceremony of burning the time, 52 stalks of canes, And this is the symbolic representation in stone of the 52 years old, 52 years of age of the time. And that's in the end, man is a flower, he blooms, then he withered. Thank you very much.